Eric Lindstrom is the Global Director of Production Control and Logistics. Unfortunately, he had some last-minute personal travels come up and wasn't going to be able to join with us today. So he was gracious enough to give us an opportunity to pre-record an interview with him earlier this week, which we'll be playing for you here in a few minutes. It's going to reflect on their 2-year journey from their initial pilots back in 2018, early 2019, to their current commitment to roll out to over 100 plants around the world. And so I really want to use this as a session to talk more about the business story behind it. We're not going to be so much into the technical details of buffering, but I think you're going to hear from Eric some very interesting, anecdotes and stories about why is Ddmrp strategic to their corporate priorities. How is it anchoring some of the other initiatives that they have in their environment? And so while he's not going to be available to answer your questions, I'll do my level best to help address any questions you may have and share my perspective. We're involved with Aptiv on a daily basis as they continue down their path. And so hopefully you'll find this quite interesting as we go forward. So with that, I'm going to ask the staff to turn on Eric's interview.
Okay. Well, I'm delighted to introduce Eric Lindstrom of Aptiv. Eric has been a client of ours for the last couple of years, and Aptiv are engaged in a very aggressive rollout right now of Ddmrp and Replenishment Plus. And we're really delighted to have Eric as one of our guest speakers. And so we thought we'd kind of take a little bit different approach and do more of an interview. A lot of the case studies we've done over time actually become, to a degree, a bit repetitive because clients report the same results and kind of the same kind of challenges. But the automotive industry is a special case. And we thought it'd be interesting to kind of take this as more of an interview and use it as an opportunity to learn a little bit more of kind of the backstory behind Aptiv's journey with demand-driven MRP. So Eric, thanks so much for taking time to meet with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric. I appreciate it.
Why don't you just start out by just sharing a little bit about your background, school you went to, early stages of your career, and how you then became a part of the Aptiv leadership team.
Yeah, certainly. What we found out earlier today was that Eric and I share an alma mater. We both went to Miami University in Ohio, which when I was there, we used to say, Miami was a university before Florida was a state. So so I went to there and I got a degree in engineering management, which was a half engineering degree, half business degree. And coming out of college, I actually went to go work for Ernst & Young and did lean consulting for 7 years and rolling out the Toyota production system or lean philosophies to various companies, and had many different experiences, worked with all of the big 3 OEMs, worked with a couple of tier ones, and spent some time in Japan with Mitsubishi Motors. And so overall, it was a great experience, and I learned a lot about lean and lean concepts in a very short time period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and then
yeah, go ahead. So yeah, coming at it, E&Y was actually bought by Capgemini, and from there the business kind of changed and moved from more of a business process consulting to a IT outsourcing type of strategy, and the business process guys were really leaned out. So I saw an opportunity to go to Arvind Meritor and be a supply chain manager. Okay. And my boss there actually hired me for my lean skills. He was a logistics expert, and I was the lean material process guy. And we were a good combination because he needed somebody to do that when he was on the logistics side. So I try to get myself out of the sunlight. Yeah.
So what led you to Aptiv?
And then I ended up at a couple of tier ones, and then was at Yazaki, and my former boss from TRW moved over to Aptiv, and he brought me over here.
Awesome.
And yeah, so he wanted me to be a part of the leadership team and bring some new concepts to Aptiv on how we manage our supply chain.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about Aptiv, the company background, and kind of what part of the automotive industry they play in and things like that.
Yeah, so Aptiv is actually formerly known as Delphi, which was GM's parts group. So GM spun off its parts group into Delphi, and then over time the business has changed and really morphed into more of a technology company than a brute force automotive company.
Mhm.
And so Aptiv in 2017, 2018, right around December time period, was born Aptiv, which is a technology company now, focusing in on automotive solutions. And so we have two core businesses. We have ASUX, which is Advanced Safety and User Experience, and we have the Signal and Power Solutions business, and that's focusing in on the wiring and connectors. So, our go-to-market strategy is we have the brains and the nervous system. So we're able to provide the technology side with our safety and user experience business. We do a lot of software, active safety, passive safety, and then infotainment and the cockpit experience. And then the signal and power business, which does the electrification of the vehicle. So getting power to all of your devices through wire harnesses and connectors.
Yeah. It seems like there's a growing footprint of electrical components in automobiles. I mean, especially back when I had a car, if you had an AFM radio, it was a big deal. Now the systems that are in the automobiles is just so much more advanced, plus the electrical cars coming into the market. How has that affected your business?
It's a growth potential for us. So the electrification, the more wiring and the more connectors in the vehicle, the more opportunity we have to get Aptiv content into the vehicle. And with having both the brains and the nervous system, it's a very compelling go-to-market strategy for our customers. We're able to bring both sides of the electrification with the software and the hardware into a vehicle that's already been tested and proven out.
Absolutely. So one of the things I've noticed in working with Aptiv and some of our other automotive accounts is that it's a very interesting industry. Earlier in my career, I'd spent time in Detroit when I was working with IBM, supporting automotive companies. And I'd say the industry has progressed a lot over the last couple, 3 decades. Supply chains have evolved quite a bit. Back then, EDI was just kind of coming onto the forefront and becoming a viable communication platform. But the whole idea of just in time and the way supply was managed through the various tiers within the automotive industry was still kind of evolving quite a bit. How would you describe the automotive industry today, from what you saw back earlier in your career to where you're at today? What are some of the challenges you see, and just kind of share some observations on that side, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I mean, the real evolution of back early in my career was there wasn't the globalization. There was still, there were mom and pop shops providing parts to the big 3 OEMs, and there were very small $100 million, $50 to $100 million companies providing parts across the value chain. My dog agrees too.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, providing parts to the OEMs, and really there's been a significant amount of consolidation in the supply base and globalization. So going from thousands of suppliers providing parts to OEMs, it's come down to hundreds, and instead of them being in region, they've globalized, and we buy parts from all over the world.
Yeah. What's happened in terms of how the companies synchronize, like the signal coming from the OEMs to the first tier and then obviously down within the industry? Has there been important improvements in that made? How would you characterize that?
I mean, to be honest, there really hasn't been too much improvement in the actual signal. So, I mean, we've been, since my days back in Ernst & Young working with Ford, in analyzing their forecast and their signal, it's still the same process of basically a 12-week forecast and a 2-week firm horizon. It's provided electronically through standards within EDI, and that process hasn't changed much. We are working on the S&OP part, and I know the OEMs are starting to work on it too, to try to get a more predictable longer-term forecast, but we're still working off of the EDI 12-week horizon, really.
Yeah. And are you experiencing, like, in that rolling forecast, is it stable, or are you seeing variation week to
No,
week?
it's still extremely extremely volatile. At 12 weeks, it's probably 65-70% accurate. At
Mhm.
2 weeks, it's 85%, and then same week, maybe 95.
Yeah, yeah. The closer you get to the week, and obviously it trues up, and that obviously has to present some planning challenges for you. So if you look at the Aptiv environment, you've talked about the strategic nature of the electrification of vehicles and things like that, and how that creates an opportunity for you. What are kind of the key priorities on your agenda as you look at Aptiv in the next few years?
Yeah, my key priority actually is we have basically 3 key initiatives within supply chain or supply chain management. We're working on optimization of our logistics networks on a global basis. We're working on our planning process, which is what we're partnered up with you on. And then what we call functionalization is the business process side. So improving the business processes associated with the supply chain management, both from logistics, production control, material management, and procurement.
Mm-hmm. And how do these align to kind of the strategic goals of the company? Is this part of the strategy to, like, improve the leverage of working capital to give you more flexibility in terms of pursuing some of the other strategic opportunities you see?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the project actually started with logistics optimization. And when we were looking at the logistics flows, we were seeing inconsistencies with our planning process and the signal we were giving to our suppliers. So we knew we had to improve our business processes, and that's when we started talking to you about what we can do with the DD methodology.
Mm-hmm.
And really bringing in the demand-driven methodology to smooth the signal to our suppliers so that we can optimize our logistics.
Right.
And then from there we get the benefit of driving to our working capital goals. So
yeah,
working capital was a significant priority pre-COVID. Making sure that we had the right optimization of our cash.
Mm-hmm.
Post-COVID, it's been a different challenge. But we'll be back to focusing in on driving the working capital goals and initiatives within the company.
Let's come back to COVID in a couple minutes, because I know that's been a critical topic that we've all seen, universally, our audience in their own respective industries and things like that, but as well as some of the impacts that we've seen it having with Aptiv over time. So when you talk about you talked about logistics. I'd like to come back to that one in a second, but let's spend a little bit of time on your Ddmrp journey. So I think it was back in the fall of 2018 that we first got started working towards a pilot. What were kind of the factors leading up to that, and kind of just to share your observations and experience from that whole process?
Yeah, so when we looked at we do have an operating system here, an MOS, which is a guideline for our inventory models. And when I run those across plants and regions, we are never at our MOS. We're usually double the standard that we've defined for value and parts of inventory in the plants. And we were looking for a solution to address that, and that's where the demand-driven methodology came from, or was introduced to us, and we decided to do a small pilot across, was it 50 or 100 parts in one plant, and prove out the methodology and the opportunity. And so the first 50, 100 parts were successful. We rolled it to the entire plant. We were eventually successful. We definitely had adoption issues with training of the procurement folks and getting them to believe in the methodology. But as soon as we got them to believe, it was a very quick results achieved in that plant.
Yeah.
So it was 3 months of pain of daily meetings and trying to understand why our working capital position wasn't changing. And then the light went on, and in 6 weeks, the plant was optimized.
Yeah. It's an interesting change management exercise, obviously, and that we'll come back to that a bit as well. So obviously, you started to get results from that. I remember talking in those early days, and you started considering the potential of a wider deployment. I'd be interested if you would share kind of the journey to get other stakeholders within Aptiv kind of on board. I think that is part of the journey for every one of our clients is, building awareness, what's different about this, how does it work, and getting their interest and support. So just talk about what you went through in that side of the activities.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So it's always the not my idea type. So it's not if for the other businesses or for people within the company, if it can be, I didn't come up with the idea, so therefore I'm not going to adopt it. Mm-hmm. Or, what I'm doing is already working. And so we actually had to go out and, with the help of Eric, and some of our other partners.
Yeah. We can talk about TCS here.
Yeah. So TCS, our IT partner, actually went out into plants, and we had to go into the details at a part number level and evaluate the opportunity of using the buffering methodology versus the MRP methodology. Mm-hmm. So we took pilot plants or plants in each of the businesses. So we started in wiring, and then it was connection systems and our electronics business that we're bringing along. And we had to get them to believe and see it with data before they would adopt. Yeah. And as soon as they did see the data, we all agreed that we would adopt the methodology for the company, mm-hmm. and roll it out globally across all sites. So we made this decision right before COVID. Yeah. So we made this decision in Q4 of last year. We put together a very aggressive rollout schedule, and then all of our priorities changed.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So there was a clear view of an opportunity that you had demonstrated in the first plant down in Juarez, that you then saw through simulations at the other locations, building up stakeholder, buy-in. We were getting ready to kind of get the rollout program started in the January, February timeframe, as I recall, of last year, and then we all got hit with the pandemic. So obviously we put things on hold for a while. Everybody retrenched. I think you folks had some plant shutdowns. Just talk through what COVID meant to you in Aptiv relative to not just our program, but to the industry in general.
Yeah, I mean, it shut us down for almost 2 full months. We walked out in late March, and really we didn't come back until early May, and we came back very slow. Mm-hmm. And so we came back at 25% of volume maybe in the month of May, and it was
due to like government restrictions on how many people you could have in a facility?
It was OEM schedules. It was parts availability. During COVID, our main priority became managing cash. We weren't generating any revenue, and managing cash became an extreme importance for us. And from our senior leadership team, that they bought in even further with the Ddmrp methodology, and said, we need this more now than ever.
Yeah, so absolutely.
It was actually a kind of a good selling point that managing our working capital was with a new process was critical and strategic to the business moving forward.
Well, I think too, we've seen other clients, and I think you've made comments like this as well, that all of a sudden the supply chain processes and systems and all that stuff came into a much greater focus as COVID erupted, because obviously it's a very jolt to the system, and I think it's increased the executive leadership awareness to how core that is to business success and stability and being able to operate in difficult times.
Absolutely. It was interesting, like even when the first wave of COVID came out, when it was just China, and we were still operating, and we were on daily calls talking about escalations of parts and looking at how many critical parts we would have coming out of China on a global basis, and we had a lot of inventory,
Mm-hmm.
and it was eye-opening, I think, to the organization. So we had a lot of inventory on some parts, and we had no inventory on
others. Yeah.
And that's what I review now with the leadership team. So even if we talk about the journey post COVID,
Right.
I mean, I remember sitting in my office here in like April of last year, thinking, what is the world going to be like?
Right.
We're not working, we're not building anything. Are we going to be completely collapsed?
Yeah.
And May came around really slow. June started picking up. We come out of July and we were back to pre-COVID volumes plus.
Yeah.
It hit us. The volume came back immediately. And so we went from sitting around thinking, what are we going to do?
The world is ending. Yeah.
The world is ending, to working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, just doing everything we can to get parts and keep our plants running.
Yeah, I had seen something about that. It was around the August timeframe, maybe September, or something about, there was a report that I saw about how dealership inventories had gone, I think it's around 60, 70 days supply or something like that. And they were in the low 20s.
Yeah.
And it was just eye-opening, because here we're in this, where'd all those cars go? Did people take their incentive checks or their, government subsidy and go buy cars with it or whatever? But it just was startling. And then I guess what happened is that as the OEMs really got back in gear and got back operational on their own footprint, they obviously, the first priority is get product back into the market so that they can get their own cash flows generating again. So I expect what you're saying is then the recoil of that then fell onto you folks. Tier one, now you're trying to keep up with what they're trying to do to replace their inventory. Is that kind of the way things were playing out?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So they were down and they're still not replenished. And yeah, I think if you remember last summer, there was a bunch of advertising going around, get a car, don't pay for 6 months. They were doing everything they could to market and keep vehicles being sold. Mm-hmm. And so they incentivized a bunch of sales and depleted their inventory, and we're still trying to build it back. Yep.
Okay.
And
interesting.
Yeah. So
you had a pilot plant that was already running with Ddmrp. Did it fare any better, as this whole process erupted on you?
It did, and even the pilot plant, even the plants that were initially implemented on it, have performed better. So the buffering methodology was it ensured that the right parts were at the plant to support production. No,
great.
It doesn't last forever, as parts are being shorted, but the pilot plant and the plants that had some of the methodology, had some of a portion rolled out, have definitely performed better, and had much less disruption due to part shortages.
Great. So one thing we didn't get to talk about, you had talked about logistics optimization, and we've started a project for a distribution center with you. Just talk about what that opportunity represents and how it ties into this whole rollout campaign that you're on.
Yeah, we buy parts. So looking at our supply chain model, it's part of the overall, the three-legged strategy is in the functionalization and improving our business processes is how do we manage our supply base better. And so instead of having 20 plants create an order to a supplier, we're looking at managing our suppliers more centrally and through a distribution model to be able to position inventory strategically in region close to our plants and be able to distribute it to them to, further optimize working capital and also, drive improvements in the plant operational performance.
Yeah. Understand as part of that, you're expecting also to free up working space in the plants where the storage locations can get smaller and you have now more room for production activities.
Yeah, exactly. So we can convert, dead manufacturing space that is storing inventory into productive space and, drive revenue into our manufacturing facilities.
In terms of the supplier side of this, then obviously it's got to have some benefit for them in terms of simplifying how many different signals they're getting from Aptiv. Have you had any kind of feedback from them? Are they supportive or are they concerned about it? What's been the supplier side reaction?
We're working through it with them. They've been generally supportive. The process, like I said, the process has smoothed out for them. So instead of getting, the tidal wave of orders up and down, cancellations, they get a much more consistent order book from us. So they're definitely pleased with that. We're bringing up the distribution model this summer, so hopefully we'll further see, simplification and smoothing of the signal throughout the supply base.
Yeah. Well, one of the other interesting aspects that we've talked about has been the fact that by some of the suppliers have large MOQs attached to their ordering policies, whereas the need at the plant doesn't necessarily justify that large of a minimum order quantity. And so I think you're going to have opportunities now in the distribution model to break some of that bulk down so that you got smaller quantities going out to the plant locations.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll bring in the MOQs into the distribution center and be able to meter the right amount of inventory into the plants.
Right.
And a lot of our inventory parts are shared across plants. So
yeah, absolutely. So in terms of kind of next steps, obviously we're engaged in the rollout now. We've got an aggressive schedule about that. Talk about, as we started to hit the gas in the fall timeframe, and really had an aggressive schedule in terms of additional plants, some of the lessons learned that you experienced that you would share with our audience today.
Yeah, I think the number one lesson learned I have out of this is training virtually is not as effective as training on site. So we have had to train, retrain, and retrain the facilities because you can't guarantee that they're captive, when we're training virtually. So, it's even a further challenge. So on top of just training, we're doing daily meetings now. We needed to bring in more support than we needed in the past because we were able to have our internal SME, subject matter expert on site with the plant, holding their hands, walking them through the process, answering questions, the support of DD Tech and TCS being there to support the plants and answer their questions live, whereas now they didn't have that in the rollout. So we've had to bring on additional resource, and have kind of forced the communication with the plants, so that they have the forum to ask the questions and understand the methodology. And we're starting to see some much better traction, I think. And
absolutely. Well, I think too, compounding all of this is what we had just talked about with COVID, right? You talk about some of the supply disruptions you've had with some of your vendors. The challenge at the plant level then means that they're distracted with how do I deal with this supply shortage where someone's got to jump in and deal with those crises. And I think that's been competing a bit for time and attention of the planning community at the plants.
It absolutely has. And what's really interesting is the flip side of that is
don't worry about it.
Yeah, she's a puppy that, she needs a trainer.
There you go.
So I guess where I was headed to is the flip side of it is that our senior management have further recognized the benefit of the buffering methodology, and really, they are at times saying, well, let's make sure we're carrying more inventory or the right amount of inventory, and the message isn't carrying more, it's carrying the right inventory.
Yeah.
So making sure that we buffer correctly. Hey. No. I'm bringing in some extra resources too.
There you go. You got to bring in some more subject matter experts to help out. Somebody
to calm her down.
Yeah. So, okay, I appreciate all the background, and I really appreciate your sharing time with us. As you were to kind of assimilate all of the experience that you've had on this demand-driven journey that you've been on with Aptiv, the role that you've played there. We just talked about training and the criticality of that, and some of the challenges in a socially distant or distant learning kind of mode. What other suggestions would you have for those considering, adopting demand-driven MRP and really looking to take those next steps down this path?
Yeah, I think it's important, in addition, to bring in internal resource that have the expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been developing it, through kind of organically through training and through like super users. But it's also what we've seen is it's important to go out and hire a couple of experts,
Mm-hmm.
so that you get that immediate credibility and knowledge that
Yeah.
has already been down this path, knows knows the tricks and knows the pitfalls that can help you navigate through this as you're rolling it out. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's I mean, from a business process perspective, a material planner that sits in a plant procuring material, they're busy all day long, every day, chasing parts, ordering parts, counting parts, and running their MRP process.
Mm-hmm.
And when we bring in the DdmrP methodology, their workload goes down significantly.
Yeah.
And so they start to question, what's going on? Why aren't we fighting fires? Why aren't we chasing this? Why aren't we doing this?
Yeah.
I don't have as much workload to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
to be able to provide them the guidance along the way and be able to speak to them.
Yeah.
Having
I
that
think
expertise is critical.
You've hired some really well-known subject matter experts onto your team. I think that's great. I think it's also an indication of the broadening adoption of DdmrP in the market, that there are now people that recruiters can find who've got the expertise and can help supplement the leadership within organizations that want to go down that journey. What are the other thoughts you might share with other executives about what you've learned through this process to date?
For me, I think you kind of stumped me, but for me, it gets back to like the beginning of my career in the lean planning. And when we first met in our office, Eric, and we talked about it, and I said, well, it's like a pull system. And he said, no, it's not. It's not a compound system. It's much more of it. But it does get back to the principles, of driving, one piece flow, having material flow through your plants. And, when I see the benefits of the plants that we have it in, uptime percentages go up, premium freight goes down, and inventory goes down. And our goal is to make working capital happen. It's not that we want to manage working capital. We want working capital to be, just a function of our process and our system.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's been delightful working with you. I really appreciate your time and supporting us today. I know you've got travel scheduled later this week, so we pre-recorded it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. I think our audience will be extremely interested in the comments. It's a very interesting industry you work in. It's a tough compare in some ways. I mean, what we see in other industries is that 25, 35, 40% improvements are real easy to do, but being able to deliver those kind of benefits in auto is another statement altogether, because the industry, I think, has made progress, and you have pretty good coordination between the tiers. Obviously, COVID has had an impact this year, but we're proud to be working with you. We're very excited about the opportunity going forward. And again, I want to thank you for your time today. Appreciate your sharing the story, and wish you safe travels.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate our partnership.
All right. Well, you have a great day.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Eric. It was quite a human experience with his dog barking in the background and things like that. But Eric's obviously a great leader, has done great things for Aptiv. They're well on their way on their journey with Ddmrp. So wanted to see if there's any questions that have come in. Let's take a look here. And if you've got other questions, please feel free to ask, and I'll do my best to respond here. So first question from Deanne. How is the buffer profile setup process different between manufactured items created or machined within the plant versus purchased components only consumed at the assembly level? Great question, Deanne. So if you heard Eric, he talked about the different business segments that Aptiv are involved in. They make everything from electrical connectors that then go and get assembled into wiring harnesses. And a wiring harness, if you're not familiar with that, is what that is in a vehicle. It's like the connection, the electrical wiring that'll connect between the dashboard and all the lighting controls and the actual taillights and other electrical elements within a vehicle. Wiring harnesses, by definition, are unique to a specific vehicle. And so then they also have the user experience and safety systems. So they've got quite a range of materials. In the division that Eric is commenting most about, which is called EDS, which is electrical distribution systems, those are the wiring harnesses. So what we're implementing on Ddmrp here are the buffering are the components that are purchased in either from their own internal supply or from other external suppliers, because the end items really operate more of in a non-buffered. They're not holding stock. They're building against the MRP plan that's coming from the OEMs for that wiring harness for those vehicles that those harnesses go into. So the opportunity for them is to ensure that they've got all the components to build the wiring harnesses, the wire itself, the tape to bind, the conduits that the wires flow through, the connectors and other elements like that in the most effective way possible. And what they saw was about a 30% improvement in their pilot plan. And they're confident they're going to get that realized as these other plants continue to roll out. Now, in certain plants, like think about the component supply, where these are the connectors themselves, the opportunity is going to be likely to result more on the end item level, where you've got like coils of alloys that are used and stamped into small connectors that go into a plastic piece that is the actual terminal itself, and which will be an injection molded kind of equipment. So it's not a one size fits all. And I think this is an important thing to recognize about Ddmrp is that you don't apply it everywhere. You apply it strategically where it's going to give you value. So, you know, the buffer profiles are pretty much consistent when we have like characteristics, similar lead times, similar levels of variability. And it's not really a finished goods versus purchased item kind of question. It's more about where can we get leverage out of Ddmrp in that environment. If you remember, Eric talked about the distribution center model that they're implementing, which will consolidate inbound supply from their suppliers and reduce their inbound freight costs and improve the effective consolidation of those material flows out to their production plants. Obviously, in those cases, we're going to be distributing now the componentry into the EDS plants based on a single point of supply through this distribution and consolidation center. And the buffering there is obviously going to shrink the size of our buffers at the plant level because the supply lead times are going to shrink. It also is going to allow them to save on MOQs in certain product categories and get better leverage on that. So we'll see some evolution in the buffer zone values at the plant level in EDS once the regional consolidation center gets implemented. So again, the key takeaway here would be you use Ddmrp strategically where it makes sense. In certain divisions, depending on the products they make, it's going to be applied differently than in others. And that's really going to reflect kind of the business model that they're in and the type of products that they produce. Next question. Has building buffers affected your inventory goals? Well, we've seen that there is substantial improvement opportunity through the change management activities that Eric talked about. We're going through, settling in the methodology at the plant level. You heard him talk about some of the challenges that they're underway with right now with some of the supplier issues and the re-acceleration of the automotive industry in general. So they're kind of balancing two major priorities at the same time, but are very confident that they're turning the corner on that front and are going to start to see substantial gains on the inventory side while also protecting those service levels that he talked about. So Sviatoslav asked, what is the scale of current R+ implementation and is there quantitative results? I think Eric spoke to the quantitative results in terms of improved service level in those plants that have been on board Ddmrp the earliest. I think he also talked about that the training process and the change management process is kind of underway right now. But we think we're making a real big turn of the corner there, as not only are the supply issues and the industry issues starting to settle down, but also, you know, more time over target with the users at the plant level. So I think we'll be able to share more results further down the road here as they continue their implementation. Question is, can you share some common metrics you see organizations track to ensure a successful project and journey? One of the big things that we found on this front, there's a lot of standard metrics. You know, you've got your buffer targets and what the target inventory values are, and you can compare those to your actual on-hand inventories. We've got quite an array of reports available through our analytics module that are being utilized across Aptiv to help monitor progress on that front. We also implemented measurements around inventory days supply, because in an accelerating business, what you care about more is your days supply, because as you're rebounding into a heightened level of activity in the automotive industry or whatever industry you're in, you may need to carry more inventory to satisfy that incremental demand. So the better way to measure your progress is days supply. And we've seen improvements in days supply at the plant level while the business has been accelerating, and they've had very minimal line stoppages or anything like that because of missing parts or factors like that. We've also implemented things like compliance reports so that we can monitor orders that are being generated outside of the Ddmrp rules. And this is an important part of the change management process. So I don't think it's too much of a secret, but in the automotive industry, this is a very tight choreography. You've got parts on planning calendars that there are certain days that those parts can be shipped from the suppliers themselves. We have the vast majority of their parts on auto approval. And so we're trying to monitor where users are stepping outside and ordering additional stock outside of what the buffer recommendation would have been. So I think we've probably, and I could go on and on and on about the great reports that have been built in the analytics module to support their implementations as well. Next question, do you have a change management budget for your Ddmrp transformation? Eric mentioned that they've added some additional subject matter expertise to the team. I'm talking not tens of people, but more handful of people that have been added. And they're really focused on gaining subject matter leaders at the plant level, you know, kind of a power user type individual. We've engaged some of our DD Tech partners for like the Spanish speaking and the Chinese speaking markets as well. They're going into Korea here soon, and our partner will be helping them with that aspect of it. I wouldn't want to comment on the overall budget, but I think they've made an appropriate commitment in terms of people capacity to support the project goals that they've got for their implementation. Andre asks, have you come across industries where Ddmrp does not fit? Yeah, this is a great question. And Carol and Chad have always been very clear about use strategic thinking and where you apply Ddmrp. It's not a silver bullet that will work everywhere. If I'm in a heavy engineer to order industry, and we've got some clients that are in that space that are, you know, heavy machining, industrial fabrication kind of businesses where the end item is specific to a client requirement. Some of them even very complex where it's driven by a project plan. It's like, you know, some major piece of equipment that you're building and it's got a very long lead time measured in months, not weeks or days. And in those cases, you're not going to buffer end items. Those are bespoke to the specific client making the order. But where Ddmrp can be helpful there is where there are common materials or componentry or other elements that by buffering them, we improve our lead time by ensuring that we've got stock available. whether it's plate of steel or whether it's certain, forgings or other fittings that are going to go into a final assembly that you're going to make specifically for a client demand, you're going to find that there's a sweet spot in most businesses where you can effectively apply Ddmrp. It may not represent a large portion of your inventory holdings, but it can be quite effective in really helping, look for decoupling of your lead times and improving your responsiveness to the market. So I think it's more a matter of a degree, Andre. It's not so much a black or white question. I think it's a matter of really looking where can we get leverage of this. In some of those ETO industries, maybe it's going to be in spare parts management. And of course, some of the raw and core materials that come into the supply chain. Other industries like consumer goods, Coca-Cola has implemented with us, and there's a high coverage of Ddmrp in their item master list, whereas in other industries, kind of at the other end of the spectrum, you'll see a much smaller distribution. Industries like consumer goods, food and beverage, automotive, pharmaceutical, and med device all have very much more of a make-to-stock orientation and have been substantial adopters of Ddmrp over the last several years. Okay, well, I think we're at the end of the questions. I want to thank Eric again for his participation. He was very gracious to do that interview. He's obviously got some help at the home there with his dog chirping in and adding some perspective for all of us to take advantage of. He's doing a great job. The whole team at Aptiv are making great progress on their journey. I hope you found this interesting. Very much wanted to share the business side of the story, because I think what you could hear there is that the whole implementation of Ddmrp and Replenishment Plus is foundational to what they're trying to do as a company. And we wanted to try to get that message across for all of you.